There's no sound. There's no sound. Still no sound. I can see the video. I can't hear anything, Carol.
Sorry, guys.
So for grieving children, if you never thought meant to a funeral.
Now, now I hear the sound. I heard that.
I'm trying to find your slideshow.
It's on the stick.
Right.
There it is, it's the top one. Yeah. All right. Nailed it. So if you've ever been to a funeral and you've seen a kid running around like having a great time, and you might be saying to yourself, this kid, something like this kid, her mother's in that casket. Oh, okay, they don't understand that death is permanent and that it's universal. Very big concepts to grasp, right? What they do understand is that they might be getting a lot of extra attention and maybe ice cream for dinner, and they don't have a bedtime anymore, and there's a lot of relatives around, and people are bringing food, and pool is a pretty good time. And so they are kind of out of sync with the rest of the family when it comes to grief. And that'll be that way until they do understand that death is permanent. And their ability to understand is limited to their age and their cognitive development. Teenagers certainly are different than 5-year-olds, right? They start to understand the reality of the loss, right?
But you know, I was thinking about what you just said, about the awareness of children, that they eventually begin to realize that it's permanent. So I was thinking about my daughter. She was 5-ish. What exactly how old she was, 5 or 6. And her grandmother died, Madonna, my mother-in-law. Died. She was a very precious person. Sarah, my daughter. And Sarah had a little bug, plastic bug, a ladybug. And used to use that as a way of eating. And for months, she talked to her grandmother, and her grandmother talked to her. She said, she talked to grandma. So we put her to bed, and so that was not permanent in the sense of ever again, but it's different. So I don't know.
That's awesome. And but we see that all the time with children. They identify their person who's died with an object, even a little hole in the wall. We once had a little boy who would talk to his father through a hole in the wall.
The grandmother lived in town. No, she didn't. She lived in other state. I tried to use the mouse.
Unplugged,
No, you just.
because that's in yours, the only port. So you just use this. You have moving around.
For usually thousands of miles, okay, and there were people we may not have even too well.
Blessings.
Only temporarily. For a little while.
Which is next year, by the way.
One of the things that
this happened to me in the first book, was I read this book by a poet who had lost his wife. And the first half of the book was about her illness. Poem in the middle was about his death. I realized when I was reading the poems at the end, they were all like letters or notes or messages to us. So I was writing letters to her. Since she and I had corresponded earlier in our lives, it was almost as if she were there. And it was a way of me monitoring and measuring how many grief may have prolonged it a little meaningful way to sort of have a presence like somebody who was.
So grief researchers would call that continuing bonds. And continuing that relationship just in a different way. And that's so important. You can't just, take the attachment that we had with that person and then go slot it into a new attachment and everything's fine. Yeah, you do make new attachments throughout life, but when you're able to reinvest in life and get to that point, but continuing that relationship with that person who's gone in a different way, memorializing them, visiting the grave sites, honoring them, holidays, their birthdays, things like that. And it helps us heal. I don't know if it prolonged your grief experience or if it was just exactly right. Exactly what you needed to do.
Does the grief time frame, does that ever?
Megan Devine, who's become very popular lately in grief and loss world, she says grief always lasts longer than you want it to. And I think that's the best definition that I've heard today. When William Warden and Dr. Phyllis Silverman did the Harvard Bereavement Project in the late 80s, and they looked at grieving families and children, they actually found, everyone says the first year is the hardest, maybe it is. And then other people in grief groups say, no, it's the second year. Okay, maybe it is. But what Dr. Warden and Dr. Silverman found is that behavioral disruptions in children actually were more significant the second year after the loss than they were the first year.
Was for me the first time I had a big grief when my parents divorced, moved to California, my mother and my sister and I, because my father was mentally ill. And the first year I was fine because it would be in California where I could ride my bicycle to the shopping center on Christmas Eve, barefooted. But it was the second year that I started getting in trouble and began my adolescent speaking of it. So I spent several years pretty injured as a result of all that. It took me a year or so to get it down.
I'm curious about your center in terms of working with children, because you mentioned like in child development at different stages, what goes on. Because I had just turned 7 when my daddy went. And this was in the 50s, and nobody would really address it. I mean, it was everything about him was taken out of the house. I wasn't allowed to go to his funeral, and we weren't allowed to talk about him. And I was told that it was my job to help my mommy and help her get through it. So for years,
You're talking to the right person.
it's my first funeral. But I mean, people that meant so much to me died, like my grandma. And I could not have any kind of emotion. So when I was a preschool teacher, and there would be children occasionally that had a death in the family, or just wanted to let them say something.
And what was your name?
Susan.
Susan, thank you for sharing that with us. So I think that the adults in your life at that time were probably following the very best advice.
Yes.
George and Barbara Bush had a daughter named Robin, who was a couple years younger than her brothers. And she contracted leukemia and was treated in a hospital in Massachusetts and died. And George George yeah. Yeah, the most recent round, yeah. When they came home, after Robin had died, he came running out to the car and said, "Where's Robin? Where's Robin?" And they said, "Yeah, she's no longer with us." You know, they didn't get to attend a funeral, they didn't get to talk about it, same advice, get rid of everything, you know, act like it didn't happen. Kids are resilient, kids will move on. Don't talk to them about these bad things, right? That child didn't speak for a year. Didn't speak for a year. And when 9/11 happened, he was in a classroom in Florida reading My Friend the Goat to a group of, first graders. And, his aides came in and said, "You remember when that morning when it first happened, we thought 50,000 people had been killed. Tens of thousands of people have been killed, and America's under attack." No emotion. I mean, because that's how he was taught to respond to significant loss in his own life. So the very first children's bereavement program was founded in 1982 in Portland, Oregon. It wasn't until then that people really started to talk and explore about how kids experience grief differently than adults. And the Harvard bereavement study, which I mentioned, wasn't until 1987. So, Maya Angelou, she said, when you know better, you do better. And we're always learning how to do better, right? And so right now, we think that we can talk to young people about death. We can use words like dead and died. We can include them in the process of commemorating and memorializing and saying goodbye to our person. I mean, Bob, you work with dying children themselves. They can handle the truth and they deserve to be a part of that awareness. But it took us a long time to learn that. And we're still learning things, so we might have better ideas in a few years too. What you experienced was the best care that you could have. That's fine, and the best advice. But that resulted in you carrying probably a lifetime of pain and questions and a really heavy burden. And we don't want our children to have to carry. And that's why we have to fix them. I think so. I like it there.
And it is significant at what age the child is in terms of child development. Because at age 7, that's when it's cause and effect. So
Yeah.
thinking a story about
What did you do to cause your dad to go away? Yeah, that's wrong. And if bad things only happen to bad people, maybe I'm the bad person that caused bad things. There's a book about that. When bad things happen to good people. Rabbi Kushner, it's a winner. John, can you push those slides ahead a little bit?
Yeah.
Thinking of Roy out there on Zoom. You can even see this.
Well, he does have I did mail out
Oh, he's
your
got-
PDF file. Which one?
I have 4 tasks of children's grief, which I'll go through pretty quickly. So this is what came out of that bereavement study. The first task of a grieving child, and I think we could really just put in here grieving person, is to understand the reality of the loss. That the person is gone and that they're not able to come back. And we think it's important to understand the reality of that loss before we start talking about the afterlife. We rush too quickly into they're in a better place, they're with Jesus now. For a child who is a very concrete thinker, like you were saying, they're going to think that better place is like Disneyland or Florida, right? And they're going to come back, right? If I'm a good enough kid, I'm going to come back. With this, memoir that's come out from Prince Harry called Spare, which I haven't read and I'm not going to read, but everybody who's read it has told me all the grief things about it, right? And one of the grief things in it is that Harry, who was 12 when his mother died, believed for years that she was somewhere else and she would come back. Almost all of us have carried these little secret fantasies, right? That my person is somewhere else and they're gonna come back very much. But we can help them work through that by helping them understand the difference, and having really frank conversation. So the second task is to work through the pain and the grief, and like we were saying a little bit earlier, there's a million emotions that come with grief, and that takes a really long time and longer than we'd like it to. The third task is to adjust to an environment in which the deceased is missing. Like Paul was saying, the first year kind of goes by. It might be the second year before you really start to realize all the ways that your environment has changed. Maybe there's nobody to teach you how to drive. Maybe there's nobody there for you after school. When our teenagers and our children at the grief center do their activities about what's changed in their family, the things that they share, it's heartbreaking to read, but it's wonderful that they're able to articulate it. They often say things like, we don't eat at the table anymore. There's nobody to take me to my sports games. We have a teenager who just shared a couple recently in their script. They said, no one will sign my papers when I've gotten in trouble at school behind my mom's back. And then as time goes on, these realizations continue, right? And I think that's one of the major things in how grief for a child is different than grief for an adult with the same loss of the same family. For a child, Susan, as you go through all those milestones, like maybe, getting married or having children or, graduating from college, all these wonderful positive things that we hope we get to experience in life, you always kind of wish your dad was there, right?
Well, I found a new dad. So
Cool.
recently passed and I attached everything to him. So I never talked to him. I should have.
Cut yourself some slack, Susan. Okay, and the final task is to find an enduring connection with the deceased while embarking on a new life. My family.
But
Yeah.
for me, my son died 10 years ago. 53. And I still, this morning, go out every morning and look up at the stars and say good morning to them. And the starry sky at night, the early morning, is one of my connections to him. Personally, it's also a connection to my wife now, died a year ago. And thirdly, it's not just children's grief, it's adult grief.
It's the sky.
Let's talk a little bit but to adjust to the environment of the deceased. A week ago yesterday, her mom and a couple of friends of my wife and I got together at my house to clear out all the closets and drawers. And that was part of the adjustment to the environment. My closet, which was a shared closet for 36 years, is now a half full closet. I haven't figured out what I'm going to do with the other half. For now, it's empty. I did take the liberty of spreading out just a little.
You can do something later.
But the interesting thing, I gotta tell you, I just realized this morning, that night before last, so 1 week after clearing out the closet, LaDonna showed up in my dream for the first time.
So how do you handle holidays?
I'm sorry.
How do you handle holidays?
Holidays right into it.
So we just went through
Yeah,
two.
we just went through it. Yeah, it's interesting. Certainly tell my experience, but others may want to tell their experience too. I just went through both Thanksgiving and Christmas, and I made very careful plans to arrange for different activities. We did that for the first time after my after my father-in-law died. Because we used to go to his house, my wife's house, parents' house in Oklahoma for holidays, for Thanksgiving. And after he died over Thanksgiving, instead of going there for Christmas, we went on our first cruise. We decided to go to Florida, go on a cruise ship for 3 days to just do something entirely different. And this year, I did the same kind of thing with Thanksgiving and Christmas. I Thanksgiving, we had an early Thanksgiving dinner in Oklahoma. My brother-in-law and I did, and then I went up to Colorado to my niece's house for Thanksgiving Day. There's used to come to our house. My wife was the Thanksgiving cook, and then at Christmas, my daughter and granddaughter and I decorated the condo in St. Louis for another cruise.
Paul did is he made an intentional plan. He acknowledged these holidays are going to be different. So what needs to happen? How do I want it to happen? Who needs to be involved? These are questions that we can ask ourselves and make a plan around. And it's overwhelming. It can be, especially when our feelings are part of that. So at the Grief Center, we have holiday planning guides, like worksheets, to just help guide that thought process, because holidays are always full of outsized expectations, right? And when somebody has died and that person was the person that made the Thanksgiving meal, it's going to be different. So making a plan and really doing a personal inventory of what's really important to me. What do I need to have? And knowing that the first year you do things might not be the same way you do things going forward.
I don't know if it's good to make these Thanksgiving anymore, because she didn't have it.
Oh.
I would say after even 20 years, I still have issues.
Like what?
Well, and I go back to the memory of, the children and everything else. I mean, my children are dispersed. So I'm remarried, so it's not. So we do have holiday season, but it's just like memory comes back. The Santa Claus thing. I mean, spending all night putting toys together.
And we all have those different seasons in our lives.
Yeah.
Of course, we're gonna look back on some of them with longing, wistfulness, right? And that's okay too. So at the Grief Center, when we have a family closing from group and they're saying goodbye from group, they're like, I'm okay, I'm gonna get back into life now to take a break from grief group. We have a special way of saying goodbye called the 4 Rocks ceremony. And 3 of the rocks that we give the kid leaving group are polished and shiny to the story. Something like, when rocks go into a rock polisher, they're put into grit and it's loud and noisy and it's crazy. They come out, they're different, they're beautiful, they're transformed. A story like that. And then there's this one little rock that's still a piece of gravel that didn't get transformed by the rock polisher. What's that about? Oh, that's the piece of our heart that's always gonna hurt. It's always gonna be a part of us because grief changes us. That's okay. I mean, I would be gentle with yourself, and I wouldn't even call it an issue. I would call it a feature.
No.
I still have tender feelings about holidays gone by. Any other thoughts or questions? So here we are, we're in our last 15 minutes. What are we going to talk about next time? Is a question I have.
You got more slides.
I had so many more slides. But Any other burning brief questions?
What if I don't know? Well, I was in my too, so.
Okay.
mean, one of the things that are very important, really do things to understand is the importance of community, because your slide presentation is titled about in groups.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of slides.
And the importance of other people in the process. And other people in this room have recently had significant grief experiences. And we could probably spend several sessions talking about those, sharing our response to that, and responding to each other. It's the responding to each other piece that I find myself sitting here in this room between two people who did that. 10 years ago when son died, Jay showed up at my house the next day. Wheels on the chair.
I know, wheels on the
Showed up in next day with this book, Healing After Loss, which I have now been through 4 times and have given to lots of other people. But it was simply, it's a daily meditation. And there's Christian ones in there, there's some Buddhist ones in there, quite secular, great literature. And it's just a daily way of focusing on the process of grief. But it was Jay showing up the next day along with dozens of other people who showed up the next day. They showed up at my door and said, "Welcome to the club nobody ever wanted to belong to." His son. And the people who showed up, some of whom were the least we would have expected. And some of the ones we might have expected, we never heard from. It's interesting. So if I happened years ago and I've still got the book, I'll be I've gone through a number of these Amazon thanks people. And then the other one showed up. Like when he and I used to play poker together many years ago, and I occasionally referred to him. He's a good actress, and so we had that kind of relationship. It's not a close relationship, but although I kind of had on the poker. Yeah, so I recall. But after my wife died, Lane showed up. We fun. Together. Poetry book, writing letters. We did that. What I'm saying here is the importance of those kinds of things, and speaking personally of these kinds of people who respond in that kind of way, or those kinds of ways, is beyond measure. And I think it probably would be useful to talk more about some of that stuff, because there are other slides about the as a churchy guy, isn't that what the church is supposed to be? So, I mean, yes, 50s, nobody talked to me either in the 50s. My parents, of course, didn't talk to me about grief or the death of my grandfather, and talked to me about grief. I was supposed to give something. But we, well, I was, we were driving back to go on our way to California. I was in the car, I was driving. I stood
You were 11.
I was 11. So I was the man. Anyway, so we all have those kinds of things. So maybe that, talking more about that as a goal of community and maybe what the face has to be.
Yeah, we can get through that now. Sounds reasonable.
If that's not enough, Working on the
But we'll be on Zoom.
But one of the things that strikes me is my daughter-in-law lives here in Oxford, is a school teacher. And I don't know what I was thinking. Because she's taught at two schools where there was shooting in the parking lot by a parent. And nobody got killed, but the other school that she taught at, one of the students killed another student. And so I was asking her, how she dealt with that. And she doesn't like to cry in front of me. She got up and went to the other room. And when she composed herself, she came back and didn't bring the subject up. But as you were talking earlier, I was thinking about another type of grief that we all experience at a distance, but that affects our world of view and how we feel, is the multiplicity of things that is now a disease in our country. But it has, I think, a devastating effect.
Absolutely. And there's so much in what you shared that, boy, we need to send some homework and some reading material. But just the little piece you shared about your daughter-in-law's reaction. I don't like to cry in front of people, so I'm going to go to another room and I'm going to come back. When parents and guardians and mentors behave that way in front of children, and then they wonder why their children don't talk to them about their hard feelings, that's why. I think the stronger and harder thing to often do is to show our genuine tears, sadness, fears of insecurity, and let it roll through you. Every single person said, I don't want to start crying, so I'm afraid I'll never stop. You will. And then get up and do the thing that is required of you, be it preparing dinner or doing homework or getting back to your school lesson. But if we can have these hard, difficult, and messy feelings in community and work through them and still be loved and still be respected as a teacher or a guardian or an adult, I think that does a lot of benefit for our community. So whenever I get a chance to mention them, because I talk to adults who call the Grief Center multiple times a day, and that's a very common experience. I want to be strong for the children. I don't want them to see me being upset, And of course, you need to be an adult and, be the guardian and maintain the boundaries and the infrastructure. But you also need to show them that you have hard feelings too, and you can. The rule of thumb that we use in the Grief Center is just don't cry louder than the kid. Change it like that is probably okay. That's does feel unsafe. If we can quickly buzz to the slides that are what to say, what not to say, I want to run through that really. I don't have a very long. I just want to hear about the death that will occur in your community, the type of death that a community can experience, and some things you might respond, things you might want to think about how to respond to them. And if anybody wants to know more about that, we can talk another time. But in the what health section, which I think is slide like 23, like it's way down there.
Wow.
What health? These are all statements that came from doing focus groups at the Grief Center and asking people, and then also this activity that we do at the Grief Center called What Helps. And what helps is often specific memories. People coming up and saying, I'll never forget LaDonna's style. Okay, that woman had bright colors and a cheerful disposition, and she was always perfectly put together. And she lit up every room that she came into, and that's not an exaggeration. She managed to be professional. And And, you know, just this incredible warm welcome.
Anyway,
You know, presence. So.
there.
And
Maybe
then
it's a page down.
some people say it helps to hear, I am so sorry. Some people say it's the last thing I want to hear. So tricky. But what you can always do is ask, how can I be of support to you?
There you go.
Don't put them more in a position to feel like they have to comfort you. And silence is always okay. This was from a dad. I remember him saying, a simple contact with a hand on the shoulder, taking deep breaths together can be very grounding. Of course, we would not touch someone without getting permission first. But if there was one perfect thing to say to heal the pain of grief, we wouldn't have all these books and we wouldn't have all these ideas. It's complicated and it's hard, but it's part of every one of our experiences. So just showing up for one another is really important, not running away, not using platitudes. That doesn't give you anything you can't handle, Paul.
Oh, I'll get one.
Good. Yeah. Brene Brown has a video on YouTube called Empathy versus Sympathy. It's a little coaching, it's 3 minutes long. Everybody should watch it. She's showing it every and in there she says, no helpful statement ever started with cease. Think of that. At least she's not suffering it. Yeah. At least you have other children. At least you know you can get pregnant. So, and I know that we've all said these things, right? Just trying to help. So again, hi Angela, when you know better, you do better. We can always try to do a little bit better. Okay.
So if you have anything else that you want to be sure we talk about next time, just tell us on the way out.
Or send it to me and then I can pass it on. Either way.
And it's an experience for you. You, I think, are able to recognize when other people are suffering. You're maybe more attuned to what they might be doing. Then you have within you the ability to be with somebody else trying to help them. And rather than avoiding it, but it's such a thing, do one more thing and still breathe, you really have that power to be grateful.
It's just that simple. And Dr. Alan Wolfeld has a whole series of books on being a companion to people who are grieving, not a leader or not a follower, or a pusher, just somebody who's, side by side in that experience.
That
Showing up, which is hard for people to do. I've heard lots of stories of, like you were sharing, Paul, people you expected to be there weren't. And sometimes people you didn't expect to be there were. We've all seen them. When my mother was dying around the same time that she was, and there was a surgery at UNM hospital. And her neighbor came and sat in the waiting room with me the whole day. And for part of the time, I was like, why are you here? Like I was bewildered by that. My mother's boyfriend of 2 years didn't sit with me, but her neighbors did. And over that time, over the course of my mother's illness, that neighbor showed up, me and my family, in ways that people I expected to do. Because she got it. Because she had been listening. And that's really what happens at the Grief Center too, is all of these groups are facilitated by Kristen, I think, who's here today, by people who, most of the time, have had some early introduction to grief, out of order loss, right? I mean, grief is normal and all, but it's not normal for an adult You know, you're supposed to die before them. That's supposed to be the rules. You know, but when it says out of order losses, we do need extra help. And a community that gets it, and can surround us with that loving support that we need. I think this is a pretty loving and supportive community. So what are we talking about next time? We're talking about faith and positive community and how community can show up. And yeah, yeah. You guys bring it.
Will you continue with these slides or?
Probably won't use the slide.
I got questions on the slide. You know, we can talk a little bit about postmodern. But no, next time I think we'll, and Paul has, and I do, but Paul has loads of resources. And he's been reading a lot about resources, sending me some good stuff. There's a lot to dig into. A lot of good thoughts about
Anyway. And then,
but everything. I think our time is up.
Thank you very much. Sorry about the-
I couldn't third one.
Thank you, Roy. Thanks for hanging in there with us, Roy. Here are some magnet cards. Just, I'm gonna leave them here for the church staff. If anybody wants to take them, this is just information and how to get in touch with them.
All right, now.
Nice to be there.
Yeah, thank you. You're welcome. Well, we gotta give Bob a lot of credit. Kept bugging him out.
On Zoom with me next week.
Okay. Hopefully get it soon. We're gonna have